People always ask me what Texas has become today. And, I wish I had an answer for that question. I'm Matt Pierce. And, as somebody who is from Texas and is a native Texan, been born and raised here, I often struggle with the question, what has Texas become today? Texas is a strange place. Texas is a place where anyone from anywhere can come and be anybody. And to some extent, that speaks to the greater American story. But it's also a place where misfits can become, and they can misbehave. I mean, if we look around us here in the modern day Texas, we see that Texas is a place that is just strange. There's all kinds of strange and weird personalities that call Texas home. And to some extent, the whole mantra of keep Austin weird, it's kind of like spread to the whole state, but not necessarily to the whole state. You see, you hear me talk a lot about the population triangle. And the population triangle is basically Interstate 35 from north of Dallas to San Antonio, which includes Waco, Austin, all that bullshit. And then over Interstate 10 over to Houston from San Antonio, and then back up Interstate 45 to Dallas. That's the population triangle. 30 plus million people live within this population triangle. Okay? But then you have the places like where I live outside of that population triangle that are very different. And life works differently. I mean, the civic engagement is done at the beer joint and at the church house sometimes. But it's not done inside so much of the Republican clubs. That's just where like-minded people go to pat each other on the back. I mean, like out in the patch, out in the old patch, okay? No matter where, I live in the Eagleford, okay? Quite a bit smaller, maybe a little less dense than the Permian. But out here in the oil patch, the civic engagement happens in real life, okay? To where the people back at the production plants in Houston, and maybe even down in Corpus Christi, they're a little out of touch. We see the actual aggregate economics of what's going on in the everyday. We see whether people are spending money or not. We see whether or not people are buying gas. We see the effects of what the politicians are doing. Okay, to where the people inside the population triangles, the civic centers, if you will, they don't see this. And if you look at the overall kind of practical implications of what Texas or America is, it's a culture of followers. We're like little puppies looking for a leader to lead us around on a leash. And sometimes we don't realize that these leaders are just really blind, and they're puppies too. And they're leading us off a fucking cliff, right? Because they're spineless weasels. And, I'll take for instance, okay? Let's just, he's one of my targets often because he's low-hanging fruit. And that's our governor, Greg Abbott. Now, Abbott, who I often call Governor Asshat, has been the leader of our state for many years now. Largely, he's an ineffective guy. He spends his entire life preaching to the choir. Okay? So I want to use one of Elon Musk's quotes here where he's talking about government waste. You know? I mean, you could make the argument that our state level leadership in Texas is largely just human waste. They're a waste of air. Okay? But they're also political waste. Greg Abbott, Dan Patrick, all these people, maybe not so much Dan Patrick, as much as I despise this piece of shit, he at least has experience coming up through the ranks, okay? Like, he's not just a total... Look, there's not many people on this earth that I absolutely despise. Dan Patrick's one of them. But you know what, though? At least this egotistical maniac, lunatic piece of shit came up through the ranks. I mean, he figured out how to do it, right? He came up through the radio business. You know, he came up from a nobody. On the flip side of that, you have Greg Abbott. Okay? Has a net worth of millions of dollars. Okay? Greg Abbott has been sucking off the teat of the taxpayers his entire life. Now, you tell me how a guy, unless the fact that he doesn't have to spend any of his own money and he just hoards it, and he, again, sucking off the taxpayer, the teat of the taxpayer, okay? He's like attached to the nipple in the areola of the taxpayer. And yet he's going to wheel himself around and play the victim, not victim card, right? All the time. And collect just paychecks off the government. Spending your money. Quite honestly, if I had a rather, I mean, at least, look, you dance with what brung you. I'd rather see Dan Patrick. And I can't, as governor of Texas. Because at least that's the devil you know. Okay? He's not the, look, Patrick is not the brightest bulb in the box. He's not. He's a triangular Texan. He's from within the bubble, right? Greg Abbott, on the other hand, is just somebody he's made a life of making himself bigger than he thinks he is because he's got such a low self-esteem. And the taxpayers are paying for his therapy. And his therapy is getting elected. Because let me tell you something. If you take that away from Greg Abbott, if you take his governorship away from him, he's a devastated human being. You see it in his face. You see it in this guy's face. If this man has to face rejection, it will drive him insane. Nobody likes to be rejected, but people with big egos and small sense of self-security, they handle rejection even worse. So what do you do? Okay, you go to the places where people validate you. Where people pat you on the back and say, "Yeah, buddy, you're a good old boy. We really love you." You go hang around the people who tell you what you want to hear so you feel better about yourself. That's why politicians who generally have a low self-esteem become politicians. Because they can go and be around people who will build them up. That's not a bad strategy if you suffer from low self-esteem. You go find people who will build you up. The problem with that is when you get into public service. Okay? It's when you become responsible for taxpayers' money. It's when you become accountable for the actions that you take on behalf of a large swath of people. Politicians are generally out of touch with this. Politicians don't know what they're doing. And that's just the truth of the matter. Now, there's occasionally one or two politicians that comes through the ranks that actually has a sense of what's going on. Okay? I don't think that Trump knows what's going on. I think he's completely out of touch. I think he's a good faker. He fakes it. You know, fake it till you make it. Well, he's failed at everything else, so fake it till you make it. But I think there's a few. I guess you could argue that George W. Bush was kind of a, you know, what did Ann Richards say? He was born with a silver boot in his mouth. That's true. George W. was born with a silver boot in his mouth. But I think his wife Laura kept him grounded. And I think Laura Bush connected George Bush, the man, to the average person. Okay? Run with me here. George W. could not have been elected governor of Texas, nor could he have been elected president without Laura Bush, because Laura Bush was that common connection. I don't think Barack Obama could have ever been elected president without Michelle Obama, because Michelle is that connection to the base. It grounds him to the base, okay? Like a guide wire, right? And so this is what I'm saying. In Texas, our leaders have no connection other than their little Republican club or their little Democrat club. And these are people, you see it a lot in the Democrat Party. They're very weak, very low self-esteem. They talk big, but they really have nothing to them. I was really disappointed with Beto O'Rourke, who I like a lot as a person. I think he's a really cool guy. Like, he would have been a cool guy. But in a lot of ways, Beto is out of touch. And Beto needed some money to run for office, so he goes and starts catering to the National Party liners. That's what I'm talking about here. These people are out of touch. What we need is a real Texan. And there's very few of those left. We are a dying breed. We are a people that are losing what it means to be a Texan. Because you have these people that see these shows on TV, and these people that have built personas, and they come here to Texas and think, boy, I'm going to be just like him, with their big accent, fake accent and fake personalities. And then you have these other people, we call them the Magnolia crowd, who, had been heavily influenced by the Chip and Joanna Gaines lifestyle. Okay? The kind of arrow and quiver kind of people. It's just weird. Okay? Let me tell you something. A real Texan is going to a fucking flea market. They're going to a place like, the Barbacoa Shack. Okay? They're not going to go have bran muffins with cream cheese puff pastry filling. Okay? That's just for a bunch of weasels. That's just for, people who are like, let's face it, Karens. I'll just say it. They're a bunch of Karens. Do you want to be a wolf led around on a leash by a Karen? Of course not. Of course not. Nobody wants to be a wolf led around on a leash by a Karen. Maybe that's what we ought to think. I'm Matt. We'll see you next time. Take care.